Emma Sullivan, Sullivan, a scarred Afghanistan veteran, faces relentless cruelty at Doie's diner, where she waitresses to survive. Customers mock her visible scars, earn saving soldiers, including Tyler James's father. Whispers, stares, and overt insults, like a man calling her face disgusting, chip away at her resilience. Even her boss, Doie, suggests hiding her in the kitchen to appease patrons. Yet, a teenage boy, Tyler, watches with quiet respect, recognizing her heroism from his father's stories. As tensions peak, with Emma on the verge of being fired, Tyler stands, ready to speak 6 words that could change everything. What will he say? Have Emma's courage and Tyler's bravery inspired you? Subscribe to QH for more stories of resilience and justice. Share your own experiences below. Your voice matters. Support our channel to keep these powerful narratives alive. Hit that bell to never miss a story that reminds us to stand up for what's right. Emma Sullivan, a 34-year-old veteran who had faced the brutal realities of 2 tours in Afghanistan, stood frozen in the heart of Doie's diner, her hand quivering so violently that water sloshed from the pitcher she clutched, staining her worn black skirt. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a harsh glow, illuminating the jagged scars that crisscrossed her cheek and neck. A permanent reminder of the IED explosion 3 years prior that had nearly claimed her life. Those scars, a roadmap of her survival, seemed to pulse under the cruel scrutiny of the diner's patrons. Laughter, sharp and mocking, erupted from a nearby table, slicing through the hum of conversation. The words that sparked it lingered in the air like a poison. "Miss, your face looks disgusting." Emma's chest tightened, her breath catching as the insult landed, but she remained silent, her face a mask of practiced composure. Inside, though, a storm churned, humiliation, anger, and a bone-deep weariness that no amount of resilience could fully quiet. The laughter came from a group of middle-aged men at table 5, their voices loud and careless, as if Emma were an object rather than a person standing mere feet away. She felt their eyes boring into her, not with curiosity, but with judgment, as if her very existence offended their Sunday morning appetite. The scars, pink and puckered, tugged at the corner of her right eye, creating a dimple that distorted her once easy smile. She had long since stopped seeing them when she looked in the mirror, but here, in the crowded diner, they felt like a spotlight she couldn't escape. Emma's heart pounded, but she forced herself to move, setting down a plate of pancakes with deliberate care, her hands steadying through sheer will. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. 3 years ago, Emma had returned home to her small Tennessee town, her body and spirit scarred, but her determination intact. She had hoped her military experience, logistics, leadership, the kind of grit forged in the chaos of Kandahar, would open doors to administrative roles. But hope had withered with each interview. Employers would smile politely over the phone, impressed by her resume, only to falter when they met her in person. Their eyes would linger on her face, their expressions shifting from curiosity to discomfort, and the job offers would vanish like smoke. After 6 months of rejections, each one a silent verdict on her appearance, Emma had swallowed her pride and taken the waitressing job at Doie's Diner. It was the only place in town willing to hire her, and rent wouldn't wait. The work was grueling, the pay barely enough to scrape by, but Emma threw herself into it with the same discipline that had carried her through war. She memorized orders, balanced trays, and moved through the diner with quiet efficiency, never once mentioning the life she'd left behind or the sacrifices etched into her skin. Most days she could ignore the stares. The whispers were harder, hushed comments about her face, speculations about what had happened, as if she couldn't hear them. Parents would tug their children closer when she approached, their protective gestures cutting deeper than any words. Emma had learned to let it roll off her, or at least to pretend it did. She focused on the rhythm of her work. Take orders, serve food, clear tables, repeat. But this Sunday morning, with the diner packed to the brim, with the after-church crowd, the air felt heavier, the scrutiny sharper. The clatter of dishes and the buzz of conversation filled the space, but Emma felt like she was moving through a vacuum, every eye on her, every whisper a blade. As she navigated the crowded floor, balancing 3 plates of steaming food on one arm, In the pitcher of orange juice in her other hand, she caught the hiss of another cruel remark from table 5. Why would they hire someone who looks like that? Ruins my appetite completely. The words hit like a punch, and Emma's grip on the pitcher faltered, sending ripples across the orange liquid. She turned away, her jaw tight, willing herself to keep moving. Inside, though, her mind churned. Why, she thought. Because I'm good at my job. Because I show up. Because I have to. But the logic didn't soothe the ache in her chest, the sense that she was somehow less human in their eyes. Behind the counter, Doie, the diner's owner, caught the exchange. Emma glanced at her, hoping for a flicker of support, but Doie's frown was aimed at her, as if Emma's mere presence had invited the insult. The betrayal stung, but Emma swallowed it down, focusing on her breathing the way her therapist had taught her. In through the nose, count to 4. Out through the mouth, count to 6. It was a mantra that had steadied her through firefights in Afghanistan, through the screams and chaos of war. If it could get her through that, it could get her through brunch in Tennessee. A child's voice broke through her focus, high-pitched and curious. "Mommy, what happened to that lady's face?" The boy, no older than 6, pointed directly at Emma as he walked past with his mother. The mother's face flushed with embarrassment, and she yanked her son's arm, pulling him away. "Don't stare," she scolded, her voice loud enough for the entire diner to hear. "It's rude to look at people like that." Emma's throat tightened, but she forced a smile, her lips trembling slightly. The child's question hadn't been cruel, just honest, but the mother's reaction, her refusal to even acknowledge Emma as a person, cut deeper than the earlier insult. Emma adjusted her name tag, the tiny American flag pin glinting faintly under the lights. It was the only piece of her service she allowed herself to display, a quiet nod to the life she'd lived before. Most customers never noticed it, their eyes too fixed on her scars to see anything else. "Order up for table 7, the cook's voice rang out from the kitchen. Emma moved quickly, collecting the plates and weaving through the tables with practiced grace. At table 5, a man waved impatiently. "Could we get some more coffee over here?" he called, his tone sharp. When Emma approached, he visibly recoiled, his eyes flicking to her scars before darting away. She pretended not to notice, pouring the coffee with steady hands, her face a blank slate. But inside, she was screaming, "I'm not invisible. I'm not a monster. I'm just trying to live." The weight of it all, the stares, the whispers, the recoil, pressed down on her, threatening to crack the armor she'd built over years of survival. During a rare lull in the rush, Emma slipped into the bathroom, seeking a moment of reprieve. She turned on the faucet and splashed cold water on her face, letting the shock of it ground her. In the mirror, her reflection stared back, pink, puckered scars that pulled at the corner of her right eye, creating a permanent dimple in her cheek. The medical procedures she'd endured had softened the edges, but the scars would always be there, a testament to the explosion that had changed everything. She traced them with her fingertips, her heart heavy with a mix of acceptance and grief. She had stopped seeing the scars years ago, had learned to live with them as part of her. Why couldn't others? The question lingered unanswered as she dried her hands and steeled herself to return to the dining room. When she stepped back into the chaos of the diner, something shifted. In the corner booth, a teenage boy, no older than 16, with tousled hair and a faded band t-shirt, stood up. His eyes locked onto the men at table 5, his expression a mix of defiance and disgust. The diner fell quiet, the air thick with anticipation. Then, in a voice clear and steady, he spoke exactly 6 words. "Have you ever witnessed real injustice?" The question hung in the air, a challenge to the cruelty that had unfolded. Emma's heart skipped a beat, her eyes meeting the boy's for a fleeting moment. In that instant, she felt seen, not as a scarred veteran or a disfigured waitress, but as a person. The boy's words were a lifeline, a reminder that not everyone saw her as less. For the first time that morning, Emma felt a flicker of hope, fragile but real, cutting through the weight of the day. At table 9, a teenage boy sat alone, his gaze fixed on Emma with a quiet intensity that set him apart from the other diners. His eyes a deep hazel that seemed to carry the weight of experiences far beyond his 16 years, weren't drawn to the jagged scars that crisscrossed her face and arms. Instead, they locked onto hers, searching as if trying to unravel the story behind her guarded expression. His hand rested lightly over his chest, fingers splayed in a gesture that stirred a pang of memory in Emma's heart. A salute of respect she hadn't seen since her days in the military. It was a quiet, unspoken acknowledgement, one that made her pause mid-step, her tray wobbling slightly as she fought the urge to look away. For a moment, she felt seen, not as a spectacle, but as a person. Yet the weight of the diner's atmosphere pressed down on her, a suffocating reminder of the judgment that followed her every move. Emma forced herself to keep moving, weaving through the tables, the clatter of plates and hum of conversation filling the air. But the whispers were growing louder, more pointed, like needles pricking at her resolve. She could feel the stares, some covert, others brazen, as if her scars were an open invitation for scrutiny. Even Melissa, the other waitress on shift, seemed to have joined the unspoken campaign against her. Melissa's usual warmth had cooled into something distant, her eyes avoiding Emma's as she breezed past with a forced smile. "Table 4 needs a refill," Melissa said, her tone clipped, almost performative. "But maybe I should handle it. They seem particular." The word hung in the air, sharp and loaded, a polite way of saying Emma's presence might offend. Emma's grip tightened on the coffee pot, her knuckles whitening as she swallowed the sting of the implication. "I can handle my section," she said softly, her voice steady despite the turmoil churning inside her. She wasn't just defending her job, she was defending her right to exist in this space, scars and all. As she approached table 4, the elderly man seated there looked up, his face contorting into a grimace of undisguised disgust. His golf shirt, crisp and meticulously ironed, seemed to mock the worn edges of Emma's apron. "Isn't there someone in normal who can bring our food?" he said, his voice loud enough to carry across the diner. The words landed like a barrage of shrapnel, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. Emma's breath caught, her chest tightening as memories of combat flashed through her mind. Explosions, screams, the acrid smell of burning metal. She had survived that, had faced death with a courage that earned her a Purple Heart. Yet here she was, reduced to a spectacle by a stranger's casual cruelty. Her eyes stung, but she forced them downward, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, sir. I'll see if someone else can assist you." The man's companion, a woman whose expensive jewelry gleamed under the diner's fluorescent lights, leaned forward, her perfectly manicured nails tapping the table. "It's just that we're trying to eat," she said, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "You know, it's distracting." The word felt like a slap, and Emma's vision blurred with unshed tears as she nodded mechanically, retreating toward the kitchen. 7 steps. That's all she needed to hold it together, to keep the cracks in her composure from splitting wide open. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of their words pressing down on her like a physical burden. Before she could reach the sanctuary of the kitchen, Doie, the manager, intercepted her, her face a mix of pity and discomfort. "Emma, honey, could I have a word?" she said, guiding Emma toward the cramped staff room. The air inside was thick with the stale scent of cigarettes and cheap air freshener, a cloying mix that made Emma's stomach churn. Doie fidgeted with a stack of receipts, her fingers restless as she avoided Emma's gaze. "Look, I value your work ethic. I really do," she began, her voice faltering. "But if customers are uncomfortable—" She trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid, but Emma understood. The crack in her heart widened, a slow, aching fracture. "I understand," she said, her voice calm despite the storm raging inside. "You need to think about business," Doie nodded, relief flickering across her face. "Maybe we could move you to kitchen duty," she suggested, "or evening shifts when it's darker, less crowded." The words felt like a sentence, a directive to hide, to become invisible because her scars, her proof of sacrifice, made others uneasy. Emma's mind drifted to the medal tucked away in a drawer at home. Its purple ribbon faded, but still a symbol of the bravery she'd shown under fire. She had coordinated medical evacuations while bullets ripped through the tent around her hands steady even as chaos erupted. Now she was being asked to fade into the shadows, to erase herself from view. "I'll finish my shift," she said, the only words she could muster, and turned back to the dining room. The boy at table 9 was still there, his eyes following her with that same quiet intensity. He looked young, maybe 16, but his gaze carried a depth that made him seem older, as if he'd seen things most kids his age couldn't fathom. There was no pity in his expression, no judgment, just a steady, unspoken connection that Emma couldn't quite decipher. It was a small anchor in the sea of hostility around her, and she clung to it, even as the rest of the diner seemed determined to push her away. At table 8, a group of men in business casual attire laughed over their meal, their voices carrying across the room. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a smug grin, noticed Emma refilling water glasses nearby. "Hey, Jim," he called, his voice deliberately loud. "Remember that horror movie we saw last week? The main character kind of looked like—" He jerked his head toward Emma, and laughter erupted from the group, sharp and cruel. One man shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flickering with guilt, but he joined in anyway, his chuckle hollow. Emma's face burned, but she kept her movement steady, pouring water with a precision born of years under pressure. She wouldn't let them see her break. What none of them knew, what they couldn't possibly understand, was the story behind her scars. They weren't just marks on her skin, they were a testament to her courage, her sacrifice. She had pushed 2 fellow soldiers out of the path of an exploding vehicle, the blast searing her flesh as it claimed 3 others. The official military report had called her actions extraordinary heroism in the face of grave danger. She had dragged a wounded comrade 100 yards to safety, her own body screaming in pain, her vision clouded with smoke and blood. That was the woman they mocked, the woman they reduced to a distraction, a flaw in their perfect dining experience. As Emma moved through her shift, the boy at table 9 remained a quiet presence, his gaze a reminder that not everyone saw her as less. His hand-over-heart gesture lingered in her mind by a small spark of hope in a world that seemed determined to extinguish her light. She didn't know his story, but in that moment, she felt a connection, a shared understanding that some wounds, visible or not, carried stories worth honoring. The fluorescent lights of the diner buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow over the checkered floor and vinyl booths. Emma navigated the tables with practiced ease, her tray balanced despite the ache in her shoulders from a long shift. Her face, marked by jagged scars that traced from her left temple to her jaw, drew stares from strangers and whispers from regulars. She felt them, each glance like a pinprick, but her expression remained steady, forged in the crucible of war. As a combat medic in Afghanistan, she had faced death, her own and others, with unyielding resolve. Bullets had torn through her unit, shrapnel had carved her skin, and yet she had dragged wounded soldiers to safety, her hands steady even as blood soaked her uniform. Now, back in civilian life, she endured mockery with the same quiet strength, swallowing the pain of each cruel word and as if it were just another battlefield wound. At table 9, a teenage boy named Tyler James sat with his mother, his fork hovering over his half-eaten eggs. He was lanky, with dark hair that fell into his eyes, and a restlessness that made his knee bounce under the table. Tyler's gaze was fixed on Emma, his chest tight with a mix of admiration and frustration. He had recognized her the moment she greeted them, not from the scars that now defined her in the eyes of strangers, but from the fierce determination in her hazel eyes. Those eyes had stared out from a photograph on his family's mantle for years, a snapshot of his father's unit before their deployment. Captain Michael James, Tyler's dad, had spoken of Emma with reverence, a medic who had saved countless lives, including his own under fire. Tyler had grown up on those stories, picturing Emma as a hero, her uniform crisp, her smile bright. Seeing her now, enduring snide comments and sidelong glances, made his stomach churn. He wanted to stand, to say something, anything, to defend her. His muscles tensed, and he half rose from his seat. But his mother's gentle hand on his arm stopped him. Her touch was soft but firm, her eyes pleading with him to stay quiet. Tyler sank back into the booth, his fists clenched under the table, hating his own silence but unsure how to break it. Emma moved to clear a nearby table, her back straight despite the weight of the diner's judgment. A group at table 7, a trio of middle-aged women with 2 perfect hair, muttered just loud enough for her to hear. "Such a shame," one said, her voice dripping with false pity. "She must have been pretty once." Emma's jaw tightened, but she kept her smile in place, professional and unyielding. She had learned early that reacting only fueled their cruelty. Inside, though, her heart pounded, a familiar mix of anger and shame swirling in her chest. She hated how her scars defined her now, how they erased the woman she had been. The soldier who had run into gunfire to save her squad, the medic who had stitched wounds under flickering headlamps. She wondered, not for the first time, if coming back to this small town had been a mistake. But where else could she go? This diner with its greasy coffee and chipped plates was her lifeline, her only way to pay the bills piling up on her kitchen table. The bell above the door jangled, and a new group swaggered in, 4 men in bright polo shirts and golf caps, their voices loud enough to cut through the diner's hum. They settled into a booth in Emma's section, their laughter sharp and careless. From the moment they sat, their eyes locked onto her, predatory and gleeful. "Hey, Scarface!" one called out, a stocky man with a sunburned neck. The nickname landed like a slap, and his friends erupted in laughter, slapping the table as if it were the funniest thing they'd ever heard. Emma's steps faltered for a fraction of a second, but she approached their table, notepad in hand, her smile a shield against their cruelty. "Welcome to the diner," she said, her voice calm despite the heat rising in her cheeks. "What can I get started for you today?" The man who'd spoken first leaned back, his grin widening. "What happened to your face, huh? Bar fight? Car wreck?" His tone was mocking, daring her to flinch. Emma's grip on her pen tightened, but she kept her gaze steady. "I can recommend the pancake special," she said, sidestepping the question. "Or our country breakfast comes with eggs, bacon, and hash browns." The man's eyes narrowed, his amusement curdling into something darker. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice low and menacing. "What's wrong with your face?" The diner seemed to freeze, the clink of silverware and murmur of conversation fading into a tense silence. At the counter, Doie, the manager, fiddled with the register, her eyes fixed on the keys as if they held the answers to everything. Melissa, the other waitress, slipped into the kitchen, her apron strings trailing behind her like a lifeline. Emma's heart raced, but her voice didn't waver. "I was injured while serving in Afghanistan," she said quietly, her words carrying a weight that silenced the table for a moment. "Now about your order." The sunburned man snorted, nudging his friend. "Afghanistan? Probably burned herself in the kitchen or something. A woman in combat? Give me a break." His friends chuckled, their laughter grating against the quiet. Emma's hand trembled, the pen scratching unevenly across her notepad. She had been a combat medic, assigned to a forward surgical team, running toward the wounded while others ran for cover. She had saved lives under fire, her hands steady even as explosions shook the ground. But here, in this diner, explaining herself felt pointless, like shouting into a void. "I'll give you gentlemen a moment to decide," she said, turning to walk away. "Wait," one of the men called, a lanky guy with a smug grin. He reached out, deliberately knocking his water glass to the floor. The glass shattered, water pooling around Emma's shoes. "Look what you made me do with all your shaking." "Clean it up." Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat. Humiliation burned through her, hotter than any wound she'd ever endured. She knelt to gather the shards, her fingers careful despite the tremor in her hands. The diner's eyes were on her, some curious, some pitying, none intervening. Tyler, still at table 9, gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. His mother's hand tightened on his arm, but he barely felt it. He wanted to scream, to tell those men who Emma was, what she'd done. But the words stuck in his throat, choked by fear and indecision. "Emma, enough!" Dottie's voice sliced through the silence, sharp and final. She stepped out from behind the counter, her arms crossed, her face a mask of discomfort. "That's it. You're making everyone uncomfortable. I need you to clock out." Emma arose slowly, shards of glass still in her hands, her scars stark under the harsh lights. "I haven't finished my shift," she said, her voice steady but laced with disbelief. Dottie sighed, her shoulders sagging. "I'm sorry, but it's just not working out. These disruptions are bad for business." The words hit Emma like a physical blow, stealing her breath. She stood frozen, not from shock, but from the sheer effort of holding herself together. She had survived ambushes, bomb blasts, the loss of her squad mates. She had pieced herself back together after her injuries, learning to walk again, to face the mirror. But This quiet public dismissal threatened to unravel her. "You're firing me because of how I look?" The question slipped out, raw and unfiltered, before Emma could stop it. Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but with the fury of someone who had fought too hard to be reduced to this. Dottie's eyes dropped to the floor, unable to meet Emma's gaze. "I'm firing you because customers are complaining," she mumbled, but the lie hung heavy in the air. The diner was suffocating, the tension thick enough to choke on. Emma's scars burned under the weight of every stare, but she stood tall, her eyes blazing with the same determination that had carried her through war. Tyler's heart pounded, his silence a weight he knew he'd carry for years. The diner, once a place of comfort, felt like a battlefield now, and Emma was fighting alone. In the days that followed, the diner transformed. A new sign appeared in the window of Doie's diner, its bold letters proclaiming, "Proudly serving veterans, all welcome here." The words were a promise, a quiet vow to do better. Emma, however, didn't stay long after that day. A representative from the Veterans Affairs Office reached out, their voice warm with respect as they offered her a role as communications coordinator for their outreach program. "We need people like you," they told her, "people who understand what it means to come home changed." Emma felt a flicker of hope, a sense that her story might still have purpose. On her final day at the diner, the air was thick with emotion. Customers lined up, their faces a mix of gratitude and regret, leaving tips and handwritten notes that overflowed with appreciation. Some found the courage to apologize directly, their voices trembling as they met her eyes. Others couldn't bring themselves to look at her, but their generosity spoke louder than words. Doie, her eyes red-rimmed, presented Emma with a gift, a framed painting by a local artist. It depicted Emma in her waitress uniform, but with an aura of strength, her scars a badge of honor rather than a burden. Emma's heart swelled, the weight of years of silent pain easing just a little. As she stepped out of the diner for the last time, Emma carried with her the memory of that day, the boy who had spoken up, the room that had listened, and the truth that had finally been seen. She knew the world wouldn't change overnight, but in that small diner, in that fleeting moment, something had shifted. And for the first time in a long while, she felt not just seen, but understood. Against the vibrant backdrop of the American flag, its stars and stripes, a vivid reminder of sacrifice and resilience. Doie stood behind the counter of her diner, her usual sharp-edged demeanor softened by a rare moment of vulnerability. Her weathered hands, accustomed to flipping pancakes and pouring coffee, paused as she spoke, her voice thick with regret. "We must never forget what true service looks like," she said, her words carrying the weight of someone who had seen too many stories of struggle pass through her doors. Doie's heart ached as she thought of the veterans who frequented her diner, their faces etched with quiet pain and unspoken pride. She felt a pang of guilt for the times she'd been too busy to listen, too caught up in the rhythm of her daily grind to truly see the heroes sitting at her tables. Across town at the local VA office, Emma poured her energy into her work, her heart swelling with purpose as she helped veterans navigate the often overwhelming transition back to civilian life. Her days were filled with paperwork, phone calls, and conversations that demanded both patience and empathy. Tyler and his family had become familiar faces in the office, their presence a comforting constant in Emma's chaotic world. Tyler, a young boy with wide, curious eyes, carried a quiet strength that belied his age. His father, Captain James, a man whose military bearing never quite left him, volunteered alongside Emma. James's broad shoulders and steady hands were a reassuring presence as he listened to veterans share their struggles, his own experiences as a soldier giving him an unspoken bond with them. He felt a deep sense of duty, not just to his country, but to those who had served beside him, and he poured that devotion into every moment he spent at the VA. For James, volunteering was a way to honor his own survival, a quiet promise to never let his brothers and sisters in arms feel forgotten. 6 months later, the air buzzed with anticipation at the local high school's Veterans Day Assembly. The gymnasium was packed with students, teachers, and community members, all gathered to honor those who had served. Emma had been invited to speak, a responsibility that both thrilled and unnerved her. As she walked toward the podium, her steps measured but resolute, she caught sight of Tyler in the front row. The boy stood ramrod straight, his posture mirroring the soldiers he admired, his eyes bright with a mix of pride and nervousness. Emma's heart swelled at the sight, a rush of gratitude washing over her for the boy who had unknowingly changed her perspective. Tyler, too, felt a surge of emotion as he watched Emma approach. He admired her strength, her kindness, and the way she carried herself with a quiet dignity that made him want to be better, braver. When it was Tyler's turn to introduce her, he stepped forward, his small frame seeming to grow taller with every word. His voice, clear and steady, rang out across the gymnasium. "Heroes don't always wear uniforms," he said, his words carrying a conviction that silenced the room. "Sometimes they wear aprons and serve you breakfast at a diner. Sometimes they carry scars that tell stories of courage most of us will never fully understand." As he spoke, Tyler's chest tightened with pride, but also with a flicker of awe for Emma, whose scars told a story of survival that he could only imagine. He thought of the veterans he'd met at the VA, their faces lined with experiences he couldn't yet comprehend, and he felt a fierce determination to honor them in his own small way. Emma's fingers brushed against the raised scar along her jawline as she stepped up to the podium. A habit that had once been born of insecurity, but now felt like a badge of honor. The scar, jagged and permanent, had once made her feel exposed, as though the world could see her pain laid bare. But over time, she had come to see it differently. It was no longer a mark of shame, but a testament to her survival, a reminder of the battles she had faced and the lives she had helped save. As she stood before the crowd, her heart pounded, but not with fear, with purpose. She felt the weight of every eye on her, but it no longer made her shrink. Instead, it fueled her resolve to share her truth. "Scars don't make us ugly," Emma began, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "They're the chapters of a story we've survived, often fought so others could live." She paused, her gaze locking onto Tyler's, and a warmth spread through her chest. His words, those 6 simple words he'd spoken months ago at the diner, "You're a hero, scars and all," had shifted something deep within her. They had given her the courage to see herself not as broken, but as whole, as someone who had faced unimaginable danger and emerged stronger. "And sometimes," she continued, her voice softening, "it takes just a few words from a brave young person to make the whole world pause and truly listen." In that moment, Emma felt a profound connection to Tyler, a shared understanding that their paths had crossed for a reason, that his belief in her had helped her believe in herself. Across town, Dottie's diner had transformed into more than just a place to grab a meal. The walls, once plain and unremarkable, now bore a wall of honor, a vibrant tribute to the local veterans who had served their country. Photographs of men and women in uniform, their faces a mix of youth and wisdom, lined the wall, each image a story of sacrifice and resilience. At the center of the display hung a picture of Emma, her scar visible but her smile radiant, a small plaque beneath it reading, "Courage serves daily." Doie, who had overseen the creation of the wall, felt a swell of pride every time she looked at it. The diner, once just a place of work, had become a sanctuary of sorts, a place where veterans could gather, share their stories, and feel seen. For Doie, it was a way to atone for the times she hadn't done enough, a way to ensure that no one who walked through her doors would ever feel invisible again.